Thanks for joining me today. About a month ago, we travelled to the South Island of New Zealand and we had a fabulous time. We saw some amazing places. I got to photograph some beautiful landscape images. And today I want to talk about how you go about capturing your travel landscape images. Do you just take a single frame, or do you like taking panoramas? I like taking single frame images, but I also like taking a set of images to turn into a panorama. Some people might say, well, you know, Charles, capturing a panorama is so much more difficult than just taking a single image. Well, you're half right, but it's not rocket science, and you don't need a tripod, you don't need a panoramic rotator, because most of the time during daylight hours we have a good amount of light. So we don't need a tripod, we don't need a panoramic rotator to make sure that we've got 1/3 overlap. All the panoramas that I shot were taken handheld with my Nikon Z6 II and the Nikon 24-85, which back in its day was a kit lens for full frame Nikon cameras. Let's just weigh the pros and cons of whether you should just photograph in 6x4 format, like a single frame, or whether you just go the extra step and say, well, I want to show my friends, or when I get back, I just want to share a few images on social media about what the overall scene is. Because this is the big difference between shooting just a single frame and shooting a panorama. There is a time and a place to take panoramic images, and also there's a time to take just a single frame image, because at times a single frame image works better than a panoramic image, because maybe you just want to zoom in on a particular detail of your landscape, so you don't need to take a panoramic image. Or if your scene is quite small compared to the rest of the landscape, for example, instead of this huge mountain range, if it was just one mountain covered in snow, well then I wouldn't take a panorama, because all I'm left with is just nothing around. I'd rather just take a 6x4 image. So let me show you now where a single frame image is better than a panorama, and then I'll show you when to take a panoramic image, because a single frame doesn't do the scene justice. This single frame was taken after we left Mount Cook on our way to Lake Tekapo. We were just driving along and I looked out and I could see these clouds. They were just starting to swirl. We got out of the car and I just took a couple of images and it was beautiful. You could see the amount of wind, it was just whisking up this cloud. And then I thought, like, I'm going to take a panoramic image here as well. And this is the result here. But it lacks punch, because the only part of the clouds that's interesting is where it swirls. The rest of the clouds on the right hand side of the frame are just boring. They're just little fluffy clouds. So here, the single frame image worked so much better than the panoramic image. Was it a waste capturing the panoramic image? I'm not going to publish this panoramic image. I'm sharing to show you the for and against. Now here's the next example. So while we were in Queenstown, we travelled to Milford Sound. And when we were in the Milford Sound National Park, we got to stop in a few places. And one place we stopped was at this one spot here. I took a landscape image and I took a portrait image of this creek. But the landscape image that I took at single frame, I couldn't see any of the mountains. So I put the camera in portrait orientation and just took a couple of images. Here it looks quite nice because I've got everything that I want in this frame. I've got the water raging down the creek here, and the mountain range has got snow on them. It really fits everything in. So if I tell people, well, we stopped at this one spot, this creek was just raging and there was snow on the mountains with low clouds, they'll get the idea, because I've covered everything in this image. But now look at the panoramic image. It looks very nice as well. Because I've taken the panorama, I've now got a lot of the areas on the side of the creek. I've got more of the mountain range. But what I wanted here was to show people the power of the water flowing down this creek. Here, I don't get to see that. Now this set here was taken when we travelled from Brisbane all the way down to Jindabyne, and we stopped at Port Macquarie. This is the Port Macquarie Lighthouse. This single frame here is beautiful. It was taken just on twilight. You can see the light in the background. It was just amazing. And then I quickly shot a panorama, which you can see now. Remember at the start I said sometimes if you're taking a panorama and your subject is so small, having just empty space defeats the purpose. My wife likes panorama, but I prefer the 6x4 because the lighthouse really stands out, whereas in panoramic format, the lighthouse is much smaller, but my main subject, being the lighthouse, is much smaller and it doesn't take center stage. So you can see in the 3 examples that I showed you, the single frame, whether taken in landscape orientation or whether taken in portrait orientation, works best. Now here are 3 examples where photographing my scene in panoramic format works so much better than a single frame. This is the first example here. This was taken at Arthur's Pass. We're around halfway through Arthur's Pass and there's only a couple of places where we can stop. And we had noted before we were starting to travel through Arthur's Pass that this was one place we were told that we definitely want to stop at to get beautiful images of the elevated highway that runs through Arthur's Pass. This is a panorama taken in vertical orientation. So 4 images taken in landscape orientation, just tilted up. Handheld, I've got the sun just shining right at the top of the image. The sun here really adds to this scene. Now here's the same setup, but just taken as a single frame at 24 mils. Can you see the difference? 1, I've cut out quite a bit of the elevated roadway. 2, I don't have the sun in there. It still looks nice, but it doesn't look as nice as the panorama. This is where the panoramic image works so much better than a single frame. And for my viewers that are thinking about taking panoramic images and you say, well, I don't have the correct software, I don't want to go out and buy software. If you use Adobe Lightroom, you can stitch your panoramas in Adobe Lightroom. I'll put a link here on the video tutorial that I did on stitching panoramas with free panoramic software called Microsoft ICE, Image Compositor Editor. It's no longer available on the Microsoft website. I'll put the link in the description. It'll also be in the video tutorial that the link shows here. This panorama was taken in Tasmania. It is called the Iron Blowhole. They used to mine this area, and when they stopped mining many years ago, they just let it fill up. And you can see here with this panorama, it's beautiful. Why? Because I've got the whole scene here. You can see here the difference between a single frame 6x4 image and the panorama. And you see that the single frame, I'm not getting the whole blowhole. This is where the panorama works so much better than a single image. Now this one here was also taken on our drive into Milford Sound. We'd stopped at this one place called Mirror Lakes, and as the name suggests, when there is no wind around, it becomes a mirror for the mountains in the background. You can see in this panorama, it is a beautiful landscape. I took the panorama here because I had very little room to move and to photograph the mountains in the background and the lake with the mountains reflecting in it, because I had trees around. So I decided to take a panoramic image here so that I'd have trees framing my panorama to give it a wow factor. Now look at the single frame taken from the exact same spot. It looks nice, but because I'm just using 24 to 85 at 24 mils, I couldn't get too much of the mountains. I couldn't get too much of the lake. You can see here again that the panorama works so much better than a single frame. I'm just sharing these 3 examples where a single frame works better, and also at times where a panoramic image works better. How are you to judge? Well, after a while, you'll get to know, okay, this scene looks so much better. And these examples should give you a guide of when just to take a single frame of your subject and when to say, well, and I'm going to try and take a panorama. There's no harm in trying. The more you do it, the more confident you will do. I hope you've enjoyed this landscape travel photography tutorial. If you have, give it a big thumbs up, stay safe, enjoy your landscape photography when you're traveling, and I'll see you next time.